Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Exceptional Podcast, which every week we do a deep dive into different exceptional individuals that are pioneering work in the neurodivergent sector. Today, we have Kamrin Huban, who is a leadership coach for women over 50 and founder of their own coaching agency. They are the host of 50 Not Dead podcast, I like the name, challenging ageism and celebrating reinvention. They were diagnosed with ADHD at 47, which, as a lot of you may know, isn't really common when it comes to women to be diagnosed later in life. They're now an advocate for late diagnosed neurodivergent women. They are a former global leader at Coach and Adidas with 20 plus years in international operations. And if that wasn't enough, they are certified in co-active coaching and mental fitness, blending lived experience and leadership insight. Without further delay, let's bring Kamrin on. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Nat. Pleasure to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm really excited to speak with you today, and we've got some great questions, but maybe we could kick off it with you giving us a little bit of an introduction from your own perspective.
Oh, sure. Thank you. So, my story is in relation to neurodivergence. I had a great career. I was in operations and senior leadership positions. I moved a lot of places around the world. I lived in China. I lived in Vietnam. I lived in Germany. And I was always interested in doing what's next, right? Taking on whatever is new and a little different, thus living in different countries. Love this idea of taking risk. Love this idea of going where I just knew nothing and diving in and really learning the culture, whether it be of a company or whether it be of a country. And it really served me well for many years. And then I got to a point, but there were some little hints, but I didn't really ever quite know what these little hints meant until I was 47. We don't hear it a whole lot unless you are a woman, a Gen X woman, and then you're probably like, yes, I totally understand this and relate to it. My daughter when I was 47, she was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia. And I was doing some research to understand, okay, I don't really know what this means. And we were really surprised about the ADHD part. The dyslexia part, we'd had some clues, but the ADHD part, we were like, wow, she's not hyper at all, which is what we thought meant. That was how we understood ADHD, which is how it typically presents in young boys. And so it led me on this kind of discovery path of trying to understand it. And I bought the book. Oh, goodness. Now, of course, I'm going to forget its name because that's exactly how it goes. But I do remember on page 201, there is a listing of whether or not, if you follow all of these things, you may have ADHD. And of course, you go through a proper diagnosis. But reading this book, I was out with my best friend and I was reading and I was looking at this and I was like, oh, I wonder if I have ADHD. And she laughed and was just like, yeah. And it was really mind-blowing for me because what was happening in my life at the time was I was under an extreme amount of stress at work. I had, unbeknownst to me, I'd entered perimenopause. I had no idea that was also going on. And the stress was enormous anyway. I was head of operations for a global brand. I had a lot of things to keep track of and a lot of people that I was interacting with, and all of my relationships were great. I love that connection. But I was constantly, would be quizzed in front of other people about what are the little details of this and that. And I couldn't remember any of them. I couldn't grasp them. And I had always done really well of having a lot of things going on. Always liked that. And all of a sudden, the harder I tried, the worse it got. And at the time, it was so devastating to my self-worth. I just felt like, what is happening to me? Why can't I grasp, why can't I stay on top of it? And I always felt behind. No matter how hard I tried, how many hours I put in, it was just never enough. And I just thought, is everybody like this? This is so hard and so terrible. And for me, it was really devastating to my career at the time. I now know that this is not necessarily uncommon for women going into perimenopause. But at the time, I had no idea that was happening in the background. And I was just learning of this ADHD situation, which had been with me for a long time, but was it was starting to fall into place and just, oh my goodness. And I didn't know if it would be okay. I never did tell that organization that I had been diagnosed. And then I was just like, oh my God, it was probably really obvious to everybody else. And then I just thought, oh, I'm probably the butt of so many jokes. I just, like, the worst ideas came to mind. Honestly, the emotional piece wasn't as much about what they thought about the ADHD. I had internalized so much of it of, I'm useless. I don't know anything. I can't manage anything. It was the first time at 47 that I had heard that I might have executive function issues. And I think it is, in a way, it's a horrible label because to me, I was an executive. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my God, what does this mean? This means I can't manage. This means I can't run a team. This means I can't do the thing I know how to do. And I seem to be playing it out in real time of, yeah, you can't. You can't manage this. And I started to fall apart. I started to have a lot of weird physical things going on all of a sudden. One, the memory, as I already mentioned, I couldn't remember anything. But then I started to have panic attacks and I had experienced anxiety and anxiety attacks, which many people who are in high level positions with a lot of pressure and a lot of expectation have had anxiety attacks. It's like you feel like a pound on your chest, right? Or something heavy on your chest, or maybe you can't breathe and it's very scary. And a panic attack for me manifested much differently, where it felt like I was going to shatter into a million pieces. Like I didn't know that I could do anything. I didn't know if I could drive a car. I didn't know if I could parent my daughter. I didn't know if I could leave the house. It was terrifying. And then I had the very strange situation occur where I lost the ability to pronounce the letter S. So that was bizarre. And it was just all of this stuff coming to a head of, what do I do now? And so I left that corporate career. And then I went in and I got a lot of help. And I took some time to heal and to learn and to understand what I was bringing to the world and why I had always liked the risk factor, why I had always liked learning something new, meeting new people, building connection, all of the pieces that make me unique of who I am. And also why it was hard for me to then recall certain things when I got that spread really thinly, and how to help other women to recognize that it doesn't need to be this terrible loss of self-esteem and that you can rebuild. And also reaching out to women over 50 and helping them understand too that let's really focus on your strengths. Let's really get you into something that you really love. And let's be honest, when we need help, I used to say all the time, oh, if I just had a personal assistant, I could do this so much better. And it turns out, I wish that we could, in the workplace, if we could look at this situation, if we could look at somebody with ADHD and say, oh yeah, actually, they probably really could use assistance in some way, shape, or form. And whether it's a personal assistant, I know that monetarily might not be available, but some assistance and some understanding could go so long. Now I want to turn it over to you. I'm sorry.
No, I was loving it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it definitely sounds like you've been on a real long journey. And to be honest, I know it's going to resonate with so many people that we support on a day-to-day. It's such a personal story, but also it's such I don't like typical, but it is a story that I hear all the time. And while you've spoken a lot about how it has changed your future and given you actually a new lease of life, because you're able to, I don't know, you've used that kind of knowledge and that self-awareness to help others. I'm curious to know a bit more about how this diagnosis reframed your past, because I would imagine that maybe throughout your life, you've had these kind of self-doubts, and this would have actually said, actually, that wasn't me being like weak, unable, not able to function, but actually that was the ADHD.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting piece, right? For people to have this reflective time. And this, again, I know I'm not alone in this because it happens to so many women I meet, especially ADHD or not ADHD, neurodivergent or neurotypical, this sense of I'm not enough. And that started to really come to life for me really early on. I think I was probably 15 or 16. And I thought at the time, and there we look and see how our issues, our relationship with our parents, how it shapes us in our very young years.
Yeah.
I always thought if I am enough, if I can do more, then maybe my father will be interested in being a parent. And he was a parent. He was a parent, but my parents divorced when I was very young, when I was 2. And he wasn't an involved parent, let's say that. And so at 15, 16, I just thought, straight A's, that didn't seem to be enough. And then it was like, okay, if I was involved in class, I want to say politics, what is it? Government, student government. If I was involved in student government, maybe that would be enough. If I did some sports, which I love being outside, I am not great at any sport. Maybe that would be enough. And then I went through a period, I'm like, okay. When I first went to college, I went into political science because I'm like, maybe if I am president of the United States, maybe then I will be enough. Clearly, that did not pan out. And I changed course right away. But it was this, will I ever be enough? And then it was also common for women, if I'm thin enough. And that really also got all mixed around in that. And so as I look, and it was always this, if I did more, right? And it was a positive in that it drove me. But when I look back on it, it does help me to see, oh, this wasn't about necessarily winning my father's approval. There was a part of that, but it was also this, oh, okay, there was something else going on. I just didn't know. And it helps to look at my past and also now of, okay, yeah, it's once you have the diagnosis, at least for me, it helps, but it doesn't make it necessarily. I have a lot of tools now that I didn't before, but some days I'm just like, oh God, it's a brand new day. We're starting this again. And not I don't mean that like super dark, but just, will these tools work today? It's a crapshoot sometimes. I'm able to look at it with, I would say, a more lighthearted lens, and also a little more strategically of, okay, if I'm really falling off the wagon for the tools of using the tools that I know I have, I now know, like, I have to enroll support. I may have to say, look, okay, I need some help here. So it does, I think in the reframe, it does explain, I think, a lot of my trajectory in the positive, but also too, that makes a lot of sense here and there of, this not being enough, not being able to keep up and put the same habits in place that I could see my peers put in place, whether it was in school, very young, or in university, and then in the workforce. I remember in my first job, thank God I had a good boss. I guess it was my second job. But I remember one day, and I was responsible for a ton of detail. I went into a field initially where I was responsible for tons of detail. And I remember one day, we just said, Kamrin, can you complete this first? I just want you to finish this one thing first. Like, just finish it. And I've never forgotten it because I didn't realize how difficult that was for me to actually complete something. And now I can look at it and be like, oh, I totally understand that now.
I appreciate you being so honest with that. And it's amazing how lasting like adolescence experiences are. And I think while having a diagnosis can definitely help reframe things, it still is very much an ongoing challenge. And I also think that while so many women have a similar story where due to their age, maybe those over 50 now, ADHD just wasn't recognized, even in males, let alone women. But in 2025, our awareness has grown tremendous amounts. But when it comes to ADHD and perimenopause, it's still ignored. So how come we have come so far in understanding ADHD and understanding that it can happen in different genders in different ways, but we still have such a lack of understanding in women going through the menopause?
Oh my God. Totally. Like, why is this the case? Oh my God. And I I don't know if you guys are further along in the UK. I'm based on the East Coast in the US. And even though now I'm 52, and so every all of my friends, if they're anywhere near my age, are in the midst of this situation that we learned so little about. Nobody prepares us for this at all. And though I hear about it much more, it is being talked about more, but there's more education available, but it is not where it needs to be. And there are a whole bunch of women out here, right? We're 51% of the population, and the fact that there is so little data and research data and people that are actually helping women and companies really understand what perimenopause is like, and it is changing. I see some glimmers, but we need so much more. I had a friend who is my age, went to the doctor a few weeks ago, and I live in Providence. It's near Boston. We have some very good medical professionals around here. We have good hospitals. We have a lot of very well-trained doctors in our area. And she went to her primary care physician a few weeks ago, 2025, and was just like, the night sweats are killing me. I'm going crazy. And her doctor was just like, yeah. And this was a female doctor, and was just like, yeah, it's menopause. And my friend was like, yeah, I know, but what can I do for that? And she's like, haven't you Googled it? And my friend was like, yes, but am I supposed to take what is one of them? Black cohosh? The herb? And do I take it every day? 6 times a day? Do I put it in water? Do I eat it? What? Or then we were told for years in my generation too, hormone replacement therapy meant to be the cure for menopause, or the cure, you don't get better from, I don't know. You don't cure menopause. You navigate it. But then we were told for years, right, that will cause cancer. So then many women were like, I don't want to do that. I want to do something natural. I was under that impression. And we just have such little awareness on large scale of the impact and the not just night sweats. I was pretty lucky. I went through that actually years ago. I had night sweats. I don't know what that was from. Probably from one of the medications I was trying to navigate the ADHD that I was undiagnosed with. But there are literally 100 different symptoms you can have with perimenopause, and nobody helps us. And again, my friend went to the doctor, right? And the doctor's, have you Googled it? Don't you have friends that have gone through it? Talk to them. And my friend she was just like, well, yes, I have friends, but like some of us would like some hard facts of helping. And so this ADHD, being late diagnosed, and it happens so often that when our daughters or sons are diagnosed, then we were like, oh, yeah, that sounds so familiar, because of there's more awareness now. When our children are diagnosed, I check all of those boxes, and oh yeah, that has been happening since before I was 12, which is, I don't know if this is a global standard, but in the US, you properly diagnosed with ADHD, you have to have experienced the symptoms since before age 12, which, I don't really know exactly when all of this started, but it comes at a time, right? So we might be learning about this diagnosis, and we're so likely entering perimenopause, because that can happen from mid-40s all the way through. You might be entering your 50s and having perimenopause. You might have it for 10 years. It can last that long. And so then the ADHD piece and perimenopause from a hormonal perspective can really impact the ADHD symptoms and heighten your ADHD symptoms, which is also, right now you have this confounding sense of maybe brain fog, and then it's harder to remember things, and maybe you forget to follow up on something, and follow up becomes harder, or focus can be incredibly hard. And so there's that link, right? Hormonally, what's happening in your brain is making all your ADHD symptoms worse, but you don't necessarily, if you don't know to ask the questions or what you can do to help yourself through it, it can just be absolutely devastating.
Definitely interesting, but not very reassuring, I suppose.
I'm sorry if I answered the question of why is it ignored. I think it's just
I think
not
it's
enough study.
answered it by saying it's complicated and people just aren't very aware. Like I said, the doctors, they're not even sure what advice to give. And I like that though, that doctor just was one of the not so great ones rather than an example of common practice.
Yeah.
The UK and the US, where the way we diagnose is slightly different. In the US, you use the DSM-5 and we use the ICD-11. They're pretty similar, but I think the thing they both have in common is that they are incredibly out of date. They still do not recognize the impact of comorbidity and intersectionality, such as gender, race, background, environment. And they also do not recognize any sort of biomarker, so any sort of things that are physically there, opposed to psychologically there. I would like to, though, move things along a little bit into your professional life. And I particularly like the way that you said you were an executive who had executive functional difficulties, which I think is an interesting way of looking at it. And I would love to know a bit more about how you think ADHD has shaped your leadership style, and maybe also a little bit about how it shaped your leadership style when you have been abroad, because you mentioned you worked all over the place and you've got undiagnosed ADHD, but you're also in cultures which probably have no understanding of ADHD or ADHD-like symptoms.
Oh, that's such a good question. And I think that it being undiagnosed, right, in how it shaped my leadership style, again, this one of the symptoms sounds like there's something wrong. But like characteristic. Yeah, exactly. That's so much better. One of the characteristics, right, is this idea of risk. And I don't necessarily mean like I'm playing chicken on the highway, right? But the fact that I was in a way drawn to, I'm not like a massive risk taker. I'm not jumping out of planes. I don't know. But there is an element of it that I find exciting. It's, oh, okay, the new and shiny thing. Oh, yeah, okay, I want to know what's going on. There's also the piece that with ADHD, it doesn't mean that you're just flighty all the time, right? Attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, right? It's like the hyperactive doesn't necessarily mean that I'm jumping all over the place, but it can be that my mind will go hyper-focused. And so for me, this engagement of, I really loved, when I worked for Adidas, for example, I negotiated cost of product. I used to negotiate the cost of Adidas shoes with the factories that produce them. What I loved was the deep dive of understanding what it took to make the thing, what the factory was going to. I really loved having been on the other side of the table, so to speak. There was this, because my very first job was in China, and I worked in a footwear factory, and we made Adidas shoes. The factory was Taiwanese owned. It wasn't owned by Adidas. It was just a factory that made shoes, sneakers. And I would walk the production lines trying to understand, like, what is happening here? How does this work? What is going on here? Because there's just all these people doing this job. And I wanted to understand, okay, like, how does this all fit together? And so that part was very helpful in the sense that then when I was later on working for Adidas, I was on the other side of the table, but I knew a lot of those things that went on behind the scenes. Of course, I could leverage that from an Adidas perspective side. But as I grew, both matured, right? When I went over there, I was 25. And as I got a bit older and then I grew in leadership position, I could use that understanding to build relationship. Right? It was like, okay, easy to run a factory. Or later on, when I was in a headquarters office, I was in Germany, and I was then and I was working with people that were all over Asia, in China and Vietnam and Indonesia and Thailand and Korea and Taiwan. But I had this understanding. I really loved that part of trying to understand both sides and bring that empathy into a relationship. And I think that it really helped me as a leader, because then I could bring in empathy to the table And true understanding, I think, made me relatable. It made me a very, I want to say, it made me a really good negotiator because I was always looking for a win-win situation because I understood that part. I knew that relationship was important, especially, and win-win isn't what everybody always wants, but I knew that for the long run, that was important. And I think that this element of going totally in really helped me then blossom as a leader. One of the things that how I bring that forward into my leadership coaching now is, it's okay. Do you understand what your counterparts are going through? Do you understand if you're in a matrixed organization, which is very these functional roles? Do you understand whether it's what their board members are saying to that part, or what their direction is from their SVP or their senior vice president, to help with the communication across? Or if you're doing business and it is this broad global organization, it's okay. Even some of the most basic things of how are you communicating? Don't type in red type. It's super insulting to people that are in China. And like the cultural awareness, and really, again, trying to learn and understand people as humans has really helped my leadership and just experiences abroad. I had been asked, I lived in Vietnam as an American for 3 years, and people had asked me, oh, how was it? Were they nice to you? Was it hard? And I was like, oh my God, they were so nice to me. They were so nice to me. And it was, and then another time I lived in New York City, and people are like, oh, are they rude? Is it scary? No, everybody is really nice to me. And I think I hope that it's like, I just want to meet other humans, regardless of where they're from or what they are doing. And I'm sure, I know that I have flaws. I don't do this perfectly, but I think that recognizing that everybody has a story and that it's not always as it seems, I think has helped me be able to move in different countries and exist in other countries and be able to poke fun at myself trying to speak the language that I, completely butcher often, but it's like, I will still try. Hopefully makes me personable and allows me to then lead or help people in their leadership to be more effective and hopefully embrace being more human.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I think that answer perfectly highlights the kind of ups and downs of characteristics that are associated with ADHD. So you mentioned how you have the more risk element of it. So you're more likely to push boundaries and more likely to be inquisitive and to push social norms, but equally how that has allowed you to have a better understanding of what you're doing and negotiate for a win-win. I could also see the similarities between living with challenges and growing a stronger sense of empathy, which you're able to apply in other situations. So normally people go on that journey once they know they have, say, ADHD, but it's interesting that you were going on that journey under the surface. Maybe now you're able to connect the dots, but maybe at the time you were just doing you and meeting people.
Yeah.
Now, with all this insight, you have started your own coaching organization, which is fantastic. And we have also mentioned a lot about executive functioning, but to be honest, that term's kind of used a lot and everyone really knows what it means. So I'm curious to know, in your own kind of professional work, what do you mean by it and how do you support people with that?
So again, I didn't know this executive function term. It's embarrassing to say how old I was when I first started to hear this term. And somebody who didn't identify as neurodivergent because I didn't know, it just never came up in my vernacular. I never heard this term. And so when somebody first, and it was a therapist, I think you have executive functioning issues. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm a loser. I can't be an executive. So totally not what that means, right? And so how I use it in my work is I use a lot of the toolkit that I have now learned as navigating ADHD. So I don't talk to people and necessarily say, hey, we're going to work on your executive functioning skills. But what I will say is okay, what's your day like? And are you in an environment where you're triple booked in meetings all day long? And are you taking notes in these meetings? And then do you ever have time to follow up with them? And because it's really typical in the US, this insane meeting culture, I don't know if it's necessarily better now, but certainly when everybody was in the office, it was just like meetings about meetings and just crazy.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily an executive functioning issue that it's hard to keep up. That's part of what's going on out there. But the part of, okay, not being able to make personal boundaries and to be able to understand how to put this in a way that you can actually advocate for yourself around, okay, in order to do this expectation of me, it's going to take this much time. Time blindness is huge for people with ADHD, which I didn't know either. And if you're always late or trying to put in an inordinate amount of stuff into a day, I still struggle with that. I will always put too much into a day. Not always. I try to be mindful of it. But so I'll ask some questions, but then often what we'll do is we'll open somebody's calendar up. I love that when people will share their calendar with me to see, one, do they use it at all? And two, are they putting things in their calendar that they really care about, and or that is the most important thing to actually move either their job forward or their role forward, or what's the expectation we are very goal oriented in the US, right? Everybody's got goals, and now it used to be the 5-year plan, and it was a 3-year plan. Now it's like a 90-day plan, and now it's like 30 days. What are you doing in 30 days? So we've really gotten pretty crazy about that. But even with that focus, right, from maybe above you, it's really okay for somebody with ADHD. How do you make that actionable? How do you put those into little steps and break it down? And so what I do with people is, okay, let's look at the big thing that you want to do. And maybe it's coming from your job, or maybe it is just your own, what you want to do with your life, and then breaking it down into manageable chunks, and then getting it from a notebook. I must have thousands of notebooks of lists, because I know that if I don't write it down, I'll forget it. And so I take copious notes, and I am a list maker. I may never find that notebook or look at it again, but it is somewhere. And I never knew that my list was different than another person's list. My husband's a neurotypical individual, and he makes lists every day. He's a crazy list person. He makes lists. He checks all that stuff off his list, and then he makes a new one. I'm like, oh, that's not on my list. Will have discover your purpose, take out the garbage, pick up Lily from school. I don't know. Archive everything on computer. That is not a list for any day. But I never understood the difference. It was a miracle to me when somebody, and it's embarrassing to admit this, but when somebody helped me understand, okay, that's not a list. That's not a to-do list. That is a dump out of your brain list. And some of those are projects that you need to navigate and plan time for as a project, right? Archiving every single thing on your computer because I have 35,000 pictures on there, and then now it goes really slow. That's a project. That's not a to-do. That is probably a week-long project of several hours. And so I help people look at that kind of stuff and then really look at their calendars, putting time chunks of, okay, when are you at your best? Let's put the most critical thing when you're actually, with ADHD, we have these, usually, not everybody. For me, I have like this time of day where I am most productive. And for me, it's morning. In the afternoon, I feel like I'm supposed to be productive. So I used to work late all the time because I felt like I was supposed to. I was in like La Land late. So helping other people to understand where they're most productive in the time of day for them, trying to organize their day around that as best as we can, breaking big things down into manageable steps, almost like project management for your life, but also actual projects, making sure that your calendar is organized, taking them through when there's something big and important, teaching them the Pomodoro technique, doing a 25-minute timer, doing just a deep dive, no interruptions, 25 minutes. It's like most of us can do something for 25 minutes, but then take a 5-minute break and do something else and then go back. I love that method. And I used to get really nuts about it, and I would Pomodoro in an entire day in 25-minute chunks. I can be incredibly productive that way, but it's not realistic. I'm never going to remember to do that every day, to actually take the time to get that niggly. So it's bringing in executive functioning, but breaking it down into, oh, okay, how can you navigate your life in a way that is manageable, where you still feel good?
Yeah.
And can hit your priorities, the priorities that are important to you and potentially to somebody else as a leader.
That's incredibly insightful, and also resonated with so much of what you were saying, where you're like, my to-do list just makes no sense. For my entire life, take the rubbish out. They don't really work there. And then I'm also the same, where you start thinking, okay, I need to get self-help books. You read all of them, you learn about these techniques, and you'll go all in, and then they're not sustainable.
You're right.
Okay.
Right. And not you are autistic, correct?
Yeah.
Do you have the ability? One of my autistic friends is amazing ability. She's just the coolest. She has the ability. She will like consume a massive amount of information. And for her, the fun part is then pulling it all out, making it understandable for somebody else, and then teaching that in into a course or something. And with ADHD, this idea of buying all the self-help books, right? So I will buy all the books. I may never read them. I love to have them at the ready. And every once in a while, they'll be like, I'm teaching a course on this, or I want to create a course. I'm like, oh, so then I'll read it in a day, pull what I want out of it, which probably isn't a deep understanding, but like, how do I make this applicable for this situation, and kind of use it to highlight what I'm trying to get at? Anyway, I'm sorry, I interrupted you, which is...
That's exactly how I learn. I will pull up something apart and know it inside out, back to front. I'm also dyslexic, so I actually think that helps with my comprehension, because I spend so much longer on one bit of text. I'm quite methodical when it comes to, when I say I'm going to do something, I do it, but I'm not very good at picking the things that I'm going to do in a smart way. For example, you might say, recently, I was like, I'm going to do 10,000 steps every day. Now, I took that so serious that even when I was knackered, I was burnt out, my feet were hurting, I refused to stop, because I'm like, we hit the goal. That can be a real problem here, where we just take a bit too literal. It actually brings me on nicely to my next question, and it's so typical of those with ADHD. It's that, like, how do you reconcile grit with burnout and overachievement? Because a lot of us are really ambitious, and we do have great determination, because we are always pushing the status quo. However, the ADHD burnout cycle is a real thing. Like, how do you kind of balance ambition and burnout?
Oh, that is such a great thing to put out there. The same friend that I was mentioning that has autism, she believes her first burnout was when she was about 7 years old. Because for somebody with autism, it can happen, I believe, based on her research, that, and she's not just on herself, but that it can happen with people with autism. Burnout can happen, I think, even earlier, and be totally masked, right? Because at 6, 7 years old, you will not even know. You don't have the language for it. And this grit and burnout, my goodness, if you look on my website, I think I literally say grit, determination, and some other thing, right? Yeah. Because that I totally resonate when you talk about 10,000 steps. And when you commit to something like that, when you really get into a commitment like that, right? For some of us, we do that, and it is law. It's like, you're going to do 10,000 steps, come hell or high water, unless all of a sudden your feet fell off, then maybe you'd figure out some other way to do it. I don't know, on your hands or something, right? It's like, there's just no way. And if you couldn't do it, I don't know for you, but when I get into those points, it's like the self-loathing that can occur if I can't keep is so high. The ADHD part, what may happen is it's very common to overcommit and then be like, oh gosh, I don't ever mean that you weren't important to me, or that I didn't really mean it. I really do want to do all the things.
Yeah.
But it can't possibly do it all. And so reconciling grit and burnout and overachievement, I think it is really, it's an important part, and it's hard to untangle it, because I think that it's really interesting too, generationally, certainly what we are seeing over here in the US is when I was younger and growing up, right? Yeah, you just did stuff. You just there wasn't any question about not showing up. Like you went unless you went if you were sick. It didn't matter if you were contagious. You just went and did stuff unless you were literally like throwing up or like you in the hospital. So that was, and the younger generations right now, they're much more aware of, but maybe an overuse of it feels like for my generation, almost an overuse of the term burnout.
Yeah.
When they really just mean, not just because I don't mean to minimize burnout. I think there is sometimes it's, you're exhausted and not maybe taking care of yourself. But that can, I don't at all want to come across at all like I have all of the answers. For me, let me bring it back to myself. How I reconcile grit with burnout and overachievement. I think that now it's hard for me to not be hyper aware of, okay, I need to make sure that I rest and take breaks. And when I say hyper aware, I definitely go through periods, but it's not that long lasting. I'm sorry. I'm like in real time here trying to figure it out. I think that for me, if I'm trying to answer this with any kind of coherence, it is recognizing that it can happen, that I will continue to push even when it no longer makes sense. Knowing that about myself means that I have to build in guardrails. And for me, it's okay. It took me years to recognize I'm really just not that great at much past 5:30. I still function, right? I still do stuff. I'm not at my best, and I'm not at my best for my family. I'm not a great late night person. I really need to be in bed latest 11 p.m. And for some people, that's already late. But my husband's a night owl. He'd stay up I woke up this morning at 2 a.m. I was like, oh, he's not here. And we're in our 50s. I'm like, oh God, I hope he's alive. I hope he didn't have a heart attack or something. We joke about that kind of stuff. I really shouldn't. But oh God, I hope something terrible didn't happen. So I go downstairs. Oh, he's on the sofa. He's watching television. He's fine. But I have to just be aware. I can't do that. I can't fit into somebody else's schedule. And that I know that I'm going to continue almost banging my head against a wall unless I build in the things that will, again, I just think of as guardrails or parameters that make sure that I don't burn out. And for me, I think of burnout as like, when I said banging my head against the wall, right, where I'm trying but the same thing, but it's not really getting anywhere. It's okay. Yeah. And then the physical part, and I notice it too, then it usually takes an emotional toll when I'm just like, I'm still trying. I'm trying really hard, but not getting anywhere. And then this downward spiral of how I feel about myself.
I think the image of guardrails is really clear to me, that you can still be ambitious, but I think it's about setting up that safety net in advance and looking beyond the here and now. So it's not a matter of if you will burn out, it's now knowing when you will burn out and setting yourself up for success. And maybe if you anticipate it, maybe it won't happen, or if it does happen, it will be much more mellow and easier to manage.
More of a pullback and a correction rather than a trip to the hospital. That has happened, and it's happened to a lot of friends of mine too, where they just go so hard and then it's okay, you're in the hospital, and we really want to avoid that.
I think it really is like planning for success. Recently, I did a little 5K fun run. I'm not a runner at all. For me, it was a bar for me.
Yeah. It would be far for me too. I think it's far.
We had little badges with numbers on, and on it you had an emergency number. And I thought, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to hurt myself. Like, I put the safety number on.
Yeah.
And I was running, though it wasn't me, someone else did hurt themselves. And I don't think anyone dreamt that they would hurt themselves on that 5K. But because they had the kind of safety, like through the call number, it is preempting that it could happen. So I think that's similar with ADHD, is that while it might seem a bit silly or redundant to put certain measures or guardrails in place, they are there to help you. And you may use them, you may not, but I bet you'll be glad that they exist if you do come to need them.
It was a fantastic example, and I love it. I totally love it, because with ADHD, not it's super helpful, I think, to think of it that way. Where for me, how that shows up is there is the chance I use a calendar and I have notifications on my phone. There is very often the chance that I will just go through it, right? I will get lost in the, I'll get lost in the whatever, whether it's talking with somebody or whether it's, going down a rabbit hole and deciding, right now I'm going to read this book that I bought 5 years ago because right now it's the most important thing, even though I'm giving a talk tonight. So maybe reading an entire book today is ill-placed, not the best time. So it could happen. For me, it's almost every day I could get off track. And so it's having the guardrails in place to be like, okay, what is it that is going to remind me to get back in? And how do I get back in? And trying also to really, for me, paying attention to what is the ramification? I know I try to teach this to my daughter as well and to use it for myself. If I continue on this journey of where I am in this day, in this moment, all the way through, how will I feel at the end? How will I feel? And trying to be aware, and doing it in the moment isn't always possible. But if I catch myself and to try to put that in place, or afterwards, for me, the thing to really pick up on is it's the intense self-loathing of when I do something that really wasn't, not just not helpful, right? You blow off an afternoon, it's not the end of the world. But for me, it could be getting trapped in social media that makes me just feel bad. If I scroll for an hour and a half, that is just way too much time. It feels physically terrible to me. And then, so I may still do it, but it's recognizing, and it's okay, potentially for me saying, I need my phone to charge somewhere else. I need to not have that thing near me because I don't want to fall into that trap. And for me during the day, it's like recognizing, okay, when I fall off and lose track, like what can get me back in? Having guardrails that will actually work, that I won't run over and ignore.
I think having that good foresight is so important. And I think with those with ADHD, because our brains are always looking for dopamine high, you have to be extra aware. And while I appreciate we're limited on time, but there is so much talk about kind of addiction and ADHD. So for instance, something feels great in a moment. Whenever I walk past McDonald's, I'm like, really want one of them. However, I always feel terrible afterwards. And I forget how bad I feel afterwards in the moment. And it's being able to stop, think, and realize what's going to happen. Now, as we are approaching the end, so many more questions I would love to ask. I think I've got to pick the last one carefully to really end on a good note. And the last one is more forward facing, looking at the future. So in your kind of ideal world, I would love to know a leadership myth about older women you'd want to absolutely destroy and what you'd want to replace it with. So what is something that you think everyone should know about people who are of a certain age who may or may not have ADHD?
Oh, I love that. Okay. The myth that women are washed up after 50. They're just washed up. They're all done. Oh my God. So not true. Yes, there is potential ADHD diagnosis popping up. Yes, there is perimenopause. And it's a total bummer, but it doesn't make us. The fact is that women in their 50s, they have all of this experience, all of this lived experience, ups and downs, and all of this life. We've been caregivers our whole lives. We have been socialized basically from the time we jumped out of the womb or got out of the, I won't go into that we need to put somebody else first, right? And we have, whether we have children or not, we've been socialized to assume this. And the fact is that all of a sudden you get to 50 and there's just, yes, you might be taking on caregiving of elder parents, but if you are a mother, you might have children living at home, but you're likely not breastfeeding. Some people still are, but not very many. And so you're coming into this space where you have, for women in their 50s, there is an opportunity to reach so much more creativity because the demands have shifted, right? It's like when we are in this caregiving age, like basically 0 to 50, of trying to take care of everybody else. And you get to 50 and it's like you're almost forced into some breathing room, right? Because you have to do all this self-reflection of perimenopause. You're like, what the hell is happening with me? But then it's like we have so much more that we can then offer. There is a wealth of creativity that springs forth from these women because your brain also shifts, right? Just in everybody's brain, the way that our brains are and the type of learning that we do, like 30 to 40 to 50 is one way. But after 50, right, for everybody, right, the way that our brains are made up, we're much better to be able to take a broad level of experience and pull that into something forward moving. That's why, like professors, right? A lot of you wonder sometimes, you're like, oh my gosh, is this professor just tenured and he's never going to die? Or is he or she just really good because they're able to look at all of this lived experience and extract the important nuggets out or the red through line and teach it to somebody else. And that makes for fantastic leaders to bring forth empathy and creativity and to pull in lived and learned experience in a way that is really remarkable and very effective. And that is how I would love to end on that. We're not washed up after 50. We're blossoming at 50.
Thank you so much for that, Kamrin. I think that's a very beautiful way to end it. And you're so articulate and explain things in such an easy to listen way. So I'm sure people will really enjoy listening to this. Thank you so much for being on this podcast. And I encourage people to check out your 50 Not Dead podcast. Thank you so much.
Oh, Nat, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be on your show.